We know that metacognition is vital for learning. It's what happens when we analyze tasks, set up goals, implement strategies, and reflect on what we're learning.
A schema is a generalization of past experiences that forms a scripted pattern of thought. For example, we all have a specific process in mind when we think about going to a restaurant. Some imagine standing in line, placing an order and eating, and then throwing the trash away. Others imagine being seated, then ordering, sharing everything, and then paying, leaving a generous tip. We can think of a schema as a mental framework in the form of a kid's toy. Things we already fully understand, say a triangle, get into our brain without a problem. When new information is similar to what we know, say a square, it can enter the brain through assimilation. For completely new information, here a star, this doesn't work. Then we need accommodation and to change the schema itself. Accommodation is the cognitive process of making new information fit in with your existing understanding of the world. It works if new information is close to what we already know. To process the new information, we make it fit in. We have to use accommodation if things are so unique that they don't fit into our existing schema. In other words, to understand something truly new, we first have to remodel our brain space. Just imagine you were born completely colorblind. Not a million books or the best teacher could ever truly explain red to you. You need to experience it to accommodate the idea.
Jean Piaget and object permanence. Jean Piaget, a Swiss psychologist, introduced object permanence, a fundamental discovery in developmental psychology. Object permanence is the understanding that objects continue to exist, even when they cannot be seen, heard, or touched. According to Piaget, this is not an innate knowledge. Most babies under 6 months old do not realize this. They often forget about a toy once it's covered, demonstrating a lack of object permanence.
Theory of cognitive development proposed by Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget. It refers to a tendency in young children to focus on only one aspect of a situation or object while disregarding other relevant aspects. In simpler terms, it's like having tunnel vision, where only one thing grabs their attention, ignoring everything else around them.
Irreversibility is the idea that some things can't be undone or reversed. In early childhood development, it often refers to a child's difficulty understanding that certain actions can be reversed to return to the original state. For example, pouring the juice out of the glass back into the original cup would demonstrate the volume of the juice, but children in the pre-operational stage cannot understand this.
Actually is. Animism is the belief that objects, places, and creatures can possess a distinct spiritual essence, and that potentially animism perceives all things, for instance animals, plants, rocks, rivers, weather systems, human handiwork, and perhaps even words, as animated and alive.
For example, they are talking to their toys and also feeding them. Active reasoning is when a child fails to understand the true relationship between cause and effect. Recentering is the ability to focus on multiple aspects of a situation or problem at the same time, rather than just focusing on one. It's a skill that develops as children grow, allowing them to see things from different perspectives. Reversibility. The child learns that some things that have been changed can be returned to their original state.
What is conservation in Piaget's theory? Conservation is the understanding that certain properties of the object remain the same even if their appearance or the arrangement changes.
In this section, as we review Piaget's theories, we're going to look at seriation, and keep in mind that we have a definition of this that we're going to discuss in a minute. But one of the things that we see as children move into the concrete operational development phase is that they are capable, as they near the end of it, of complex seriation upon a number of variables. Let's start out here, seriation and concrete operations. And of course, we're going to want to come in and look at a definition. Now, this definition of seriation states, and I'll read it to you, in Piaget's theory of cognitive development, now we're talking about intellectual development, the third stage is called the concrete operational stage. During this stage, which occurs from age 7 to 12. Now, before you read on just a minute, it concretely occurs between 7 and 12, Piaget would have a heart attack over that. What Piaget tells us is that these stages are not necessarily fixed at certain ages. Different children may enter into them at different times, but in most of the situations it run from age 7 to 12. The child shows increased use of logic or reasoning. One of the important processes that develop is that of seriation, which refers to the ability to sort objects or situations according to any characteristic, such as size, color, shape, or type. For example, the child would be able to look at his plate of mixed vegetables and eat everything except the Brussels sprouts. Well, what the child did is he looked at the plate, he rank ordered what was on that plate from what he liked the most down to what he liked the least.
Hypothetical reasoning. Ability to come up with different hypotheses about a problem and weight data to make judgment.
Analogical reasoning definition. Analogical reasoning, also known as analogical argument or argument by analogy, suggests that if two or more things are similar in one way, they are probably similar in other ways. Analogies can explain or clarify an object or idea through comparison. Analogical reasoning uses analogies to persuade or make an argument. There are typically 2 to 3 premises in an analogical argument which ultimately identify the analogy. Those premises are then used to come to some conclusion. The analogical argument would then be structured like this.
Four stages of cognitive development. First, the sensory motor stage. Second, the pre-operational stage. Third, the concrete operational stage. And fourth, the formal operational stage. Only once we have gone through all the stages, at what age can vary, we are able to reach full human intelligence. 1. The sensory motor stage, ages birth to 2. In the sensory motor stage, we develop through experiences and movement our 5 senses. Our brain wants to see, hear, smell, taste and touch as much as possible. First, we start with simple reflexes, and soon after we develop our first habits. From 4 months old, we become aware of things beyond our own body, and then as we get older, we learn to do things intentionally. A key milestone is the development of working memory, or in Piaget terms, our realization of object permanence. Before that, our mum can show and then hide a teddy and we would think it's gone. After, we understand that objects continue to exist even when we can't see them. We start becoming curious about everything. We want to smell flowers, taste food, listen to sounds, and talk to strangers. To explore more, we move. We learn to sit, crawl, stand, walk, and even to run. This increased physical mobility consequently leads to increased cognitive development. But we remain egocentric, meaning we can perceive the world only from our own point of view. 2. The pre-operational stage, ages 2 to 7. Our thinking is mainly categorized through symbolic functions and intuitive thoughts. We have lots of fantasies and believe objects are alive. As we are not able to apply specific cognitive operations, Piaget calls this stage pre-operational. We learn to speak and understand that words, images, and gestures are symbols for something else. When we draw our family, we are not concerned about drawing each person to scale, but rather with their symbolic meanings. We love to play pretend, which allows us to experience something new and learn a lot. At around age 4, most of us become very curious and ask many questions. We want to know everything. We can call it the birth of primitive reasoning. Piaget calls it the intuitive age, because while we realize that we have a vast amount of knowledge, we have no idea how we acquired it. Our thinking in this stage is still pretty egocentric. We think others see the world like we do, and still don't understand that they see it differently. 3. The concrete operational stage.
Of developmental psychology, because he developed the first major theory of cognitive development. So where does he stack up in terms of the dimensions we discussed on the previous slide? Well, Piaget was first and foremost a stage theorist. He believed that development passed through distinct stages, and that's what I'm going to focus on in this video. His account was a domain general account, so he believed that regardless of the specific domain, it was really these stages that underlied development, regardless of whether you're talking about math or this or that. It's all just dependent on these stages. And he believed that learning was experience-based. So he believed that children learn, they develop cognitively through experience with the world. And one of his biggest contributions was viewing children as little scientists. He didn't see children as sort of, dumb little objects that are just blobs going throughout the world. No, he viewed them as little scientists that experiment on the world in order to understand it better. Even something simple like how babies stick toys and objects in their mouths, right? Some may view that as just a silly little baby thing, but he viewed it as experimentation in the world. A great way to learn about the physical properties of new objects that you haven't encountered before is actually to put it in your mouth. It's a great way to learn again, what the properties of that object are, the texture, right, the heaviness, all sorts of things like that. And so he viewed even a simple act like that as experimentation with the world. So let's talk about Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development. Again, this was a stage theory, and there were 4 distinct stages that he believed children pass through in order, universally, regardless of where you're from, and we're going to focus on these 4 stages. First, we have the sensory motor stage, then the pre-operational stage, the concrete operational stage, and finally the formal operational stage. Let's talk about the sensory motor stage. The sensory motor stage is a stage lasting from 0 to 2 years of age, in which the world is experienced through senses and actions, hence sensory motor stage, and it's marked by a focus on the here and now, with no thought beyond immediate physical experiences. That is, children cannot form mental representations, according to Piaget, in this stage. I remember learning about mental representations in my introductory psychology class and having no idea what it really meant. And I think the best way to illustrate what mental representations means is through an example. So what I want you to do is simply picture your favorite food. Form a mental image of your favorite food, whatever it looks like, really create a picture of it in your mind. If you're able to do that, you have the ability to form mental representations. That's all it is. It's being able to hold something in your mind that isn't directly in front of you. Call the image to mind, call the thought to mind, picture it, right? Create an image of it, even if it's not there. That's a mental representation of the object you're thinking about. And Piaget believed that in the sensory motor stage, children lack this ability. Another key sort of limitation of children in the sensory motor stage is that they lack object permanence. They lack the ability to understand that objects are permanent, and they continue to exist even when hidden from view. For example, if you were to take a sensory motor child and you were to take an object and place that object behind a barrier that the child cannot see through, the child would be confused. The child might think that that object was simply gone, it vanished, it no longer exists, and they would go about their day. This is an illustration that children in this stage lack object permanence. Now, we will come back to this because we're going to challenge that idea in a little bit, but again, we're just discussing Piaget's theory. So that's the sensory motor stage. Now let's focus on the preoperational stage. The preoperational stage is a stage lasting from 2 to 6 years of age in which children use words and images to represent things, meaning they can now form mental representations, but they lack logical reasoning. And there are two main limitations of children in this stage. First of all, children in the preoperational stage lack the ability to perform what Piaget called operations, and I'm going to describe that in just a moment. Second of all, children are limited by egocentrism, meaning they view the world from only their point of view. This is both a physical, literal thing, like they think everyone sees what they see, but also a conceptual thing. If you, for example, ask a child in the preoperational stage what their favorite snack is, and they say Cheez-Its, and then you say, okay, well, what do you think my favorite snack is? What do you think they'll say? They'll say Cheez-Its. What do you think Bob's favorite snack is? Cheez-Its, right? They think everybody has the same preference as they do, which is, again, egocentrism. And you can, again, try this on somebody in the preoperational stage, and chances are they'll do this. But let's get back to the idea of operations. What you're looking at in the bottom middle of the screen here is a sort of depiction of one of Piaget's classic tasks, the conservation of liquid task. So what you're looking at is 2 cups, same size, filled with liquid, filled with water to the same level. And then you see a third cup, which is a different size. It's obviously much thinner and taller and longer. And what you do is simple. First, you show the children that the 2 first cups have the same amount of liquid, and then you simply pour one of the cups into the thinner, longer cup, and then you ask children which cup has more liquid, the one on the left or the one on the right, or are they the same? Hopefully you realize as an adult who's past the preoperational stage that they have the same amount of liquid, right? Even though the one on the right looks taller, we know that it's thinner, and we saw at the start that the same amount of liquid was there. Children in the preoperational stage fail this task, and they mistakenly say that the cup on the right has more liquid, demonstrating that they are pre-operational. So let's progress onto the concrete operational stage. The concrete operational stage is a stage lasting from 7 to 11 years of age, roughly, in which children finally understand those concrete events and analogies, meaning they can pass Piaget's conservation of liquid task, as well as other tasks that Piaget devised that were similar. But in the concrete operational stage, everything is concrete, so they lack abstract logic and moral reasoning abilities, which leads us to the final stage, the formal operational stage. This is a stage that emerges in adolescence, so it's about 12 years of age, according to Piaget, in which children can finally think abstractly and they can reason hypothetically. So no longer are they bound by egocentrism and a lack of object permanence, no longer do they fail concrete operational tasks, and finally they can reason about hypothetical situations. They can think about moral dilemmas and they can reason about them as an adult would, according to Piaget. So that's Piaget's theory in a nutshell, but what are some limitations of his theory? Because even though he's, again, the father of developmental psychology, his work spurred on years and years and decades of research, there were some key limitations to Piaget's theory, and we now know that some of what he believed was a little off. The first limitation of Piaget's theory is that development is more continuous than Piaget believed. As far as we know, and for most domains, there aren't specific stages that children really pass through. Instead, development progresses gradually over time. Now, there are some exceptions. We have some stages that children pass through when learning to count, for example, so certain aspects of numerical understanding, but overall development is continuous. Next, we know that his tests had really high task demands, and as we'll see in a moment, when you lower task demands, meaning you ask less of children, children reveal a much deeper understanding than Piaget thought. And finally, this is kind of a funny one, his entire theory was based on his observations of his 3 children. I think that's pretty hilarious that he developed such a huge theory that changed the face of psychology and created an entire subdiscipline of psychology, all based on experimentation and observation of 3 children. That's pretty fun.
What is socialization? Broadly construed, socialization is the process whereby an individual learns to adjust to a group or society and behave in a manner approved by that group or society. According to most social scientists, socialization essentially represents the whole process of learning throughout the life course and is a central influence on the behavior, beliefs, and actions of adults as well as of children. Put differently, socialization is a process that introduces people to social norms and customs. This process helps individuals function well in society, and in turn, helps society run smoothly. Family members, teachers, religious leaders, and peers all play roles in a person's socialization. This process typically occurs in 2 stages, namely, primary socialization, which takes place from birth through adolescence, and secondary socialization, which continues throughout one's life. Adult socialization may occur whenever people find themselves in new circumstances, especially those in which they interact with individuals whose norms or customs differ from theirs.
The basis of his theory is that a developing child needs social interaction to develop things like reasoning, memory, attention, and language. Take answering a phone, for example. When the phone rings, you exhibit many cognitive functions you learn because of social interaction with a parent or other adult. Perception, hearing the ringtone. Decision making, will I answer it or not? Motor skills, lifting the receiver to my ear. Language skills, talking and understanding language. Social skills, interpreting tone of voice and interacting properly with another human being. All of this you learn by simply watching your parent answer the phone. Vygotsky's theory says that there is a process with social interaction. First, seeing, you see an adult doing an activity. Then, jointly doing, you do that activity together. Then, independently doing, you have gained enough skill to do that activity by yourself. Now back to our
Scaffolding can be used in the classroom to help students learn and achieve independence. Teachers use instructional scaffolding as a tool for student growth. Scaffolding is widely used in education in various disciplines and grade levels. It's a wonderful academic support for students. Teachers set up problem tasks for students to solve through small, challenging, and achievable steps. The teacher may be near the learner to support them along the way. The level of support is decreased as the student succeeds. Each successive step builds confidence in the student. Eventually, the learner is able to complete the task independently without any assistance. Scaffolding must take place in the zone of proximal development. Other, MKO. Vygotsky's assumption was that children learn through interaction with others, adults and peers, that are highly skilled and more knowledgeable than they are socially. The more knowledgeable other is simply someone that is more skilled than another person at a particular task. For example, an adult is most likely to be more knowledgeable at reading than a young child. However, it doesn't have to be an adult that is more knowledgeable. For example, one friend might learn how to play basketball by hanging out with another friend that is good at basketball. The same goes for learning how to play video games.
Fade-away technique refers to the gradual reduction of support or guidance as a learner becomes more capable of performing a task independently. This technique aligns with the ideas of scaffolding, where help is given initially but is gradually withdrawn as mastery is achieved.
Side educational consulting, where we work side by side with educators to improve outcomes for all kids. Today I want to talk to you about scaffolding. Scaffolding is one of those things that masterful teachers do in their classroom, and they do it so well. But it's something that takes practice, and it's something that you've got to understand well in order to implement it in your classroom. So let's first make sure that we understand what scaffolding is. It's used all over in education, but I really wonder sometimes if we're really understanding what we're truly doing when we scaffold for kids. So all scaffolding is a temporary support mechanism that we use with kids in order to build towards mastery. The better we're able to scaffold for kids, the higher level their mastery is going to be at the end. We're going to provide supports at the beginning and then gradually remove those supports so that they then can do the task on their own, whatever that might be. It might be a task, it might be a skill, but we're going to give them support at the beginning and then gradually release that responsibility to them. I think one of the biggest mistakes we make in education are on two ends of the spectrum when we think about scaffolding. One would be that we give lots of supports at the beginning and then we just never take those supports away. So then students never move towards complete independence. The other end of the spectrum would be we maybe give them support at the beginning, but then it's like we pull the rug out from under them and we take the supports away too quickly. There's not a gradual release of responsibility. We take those supports away and then they're left at the end not being able to master it, not being successful. So in order to scaffold well, one of the things you're going to have to think about is to go from here with lots of supports to here with no supports. What are the steps in between that build towards being able to do that task or that skill independently? And if you can identify those steps in between, those small little incremental pieces that kids are going to have to be able to be independent, what you can do really well as a teacher then is gradually release that responsibility so that they're independent towards the end.
Let's talk about CPD, or Zone of Proximal Development, by Lev S. Vygotsky. Let's talk about what it is and how teachers can use it in the classroom. ZPD was a concept developed by a Soviet psychologist and social constructivist Lev Vygotsky in 1896 to 1934. ZPD is the difference what a learner can do without the help or what he/she can do with the help. How do people acquire knowledge and skills? According to the theory of learning, people learn by being guided by those who are knowledgeable and skilled. What I can do, what I can do with the help, what I can do. And this is the zone of proximal development. Vygotsky, among other educational professionals, believes the role of education is to provide children with experiences which are in their CPD, thereby encouraging and advancing their individual learning. ZPD is the area of the learning that occurs where the children is assisted by the teacher or peers, or commonly known as more knowledgeable others.
So his social cultural cognitive theory focuses on how social interaction and culture influence a child learning. So the key concept in this theory is the zone of proximal development, or the ZPD, which refers to the difference between what a learner can do independently and what they can do with guidance from someone more knowledgeable, like a teacher or parents.
Lev Vygotsky's sociocultural theory of cognitive development. In the early 20th century, a Russian psychologist named Lev Vygotsky developed a theory of cognitive development in children known as Lev Vygotsky's sociocultural theory of cognitive development. The main assertion of this theory is that cognitive development in early childhood is advanced through social interaction with other people, particularly those who are more skilled. In other words, unlike Piaget's theory, Vygotsky proposed that social learning comes before cognitive development in children, and that children construct knowledge actively. As we can see, Vygotsky's cognitive development theory postulates that social interaction is fundamental to cognitive development. Vygotsky's theory is comprised of concepts such as culture-specific tools, language, and thought interdependence, and the zone of proximal development. It's also important to note that Vygotsky's cognitive development theory argues that cognitive abilities are socially guided and constructed. For this reason, culture serves as a mediator for the formation and development of specific abilities, such as learning, memory, attention, and problem-solving. Here, culture-specific tools play an integral role in the way children organize and think about the world. Let me briefly discuss the key concepts of Vygotsky's socio-cultural theory of cognitive development.
Binet-Simon Intelligence Test. Binet-Simon Intelligence Test was developed by mentioned French psychologists. Louis Terman later revised the scale and standardized the test with subjects drawn from an American sample, and the test became known as the Stanford Binet Intelligence Scale. Now, purpose of the test. The purpose is to identify children who were at risk of struggling in school and who might benefit from special education services. Components of the test. So basically the test consists of a series of tasks and questions that measure a child's ability to perform various cognitive tasks. Basically, the test is designed to measure a child's mental age, which is the age at which a child is performing intellectually, relative to their actual chronological age. Basic test structure. The test includes a range of tasks that assesses a child's ability to following. Now, the tasks become progressively more difficult as the child progresses through the test. The original Binet test included various listed tasks. This was all. Thanks for watching.
Mental age versus chronological age. Main concept. What is mental age? Mental age measures an individual's cognitive abilities compared to the average at a certain age, reflecting intellectual development rather than biological age. Now, what is chronological age? Chronological age is the actual number of years a person has lived, providing a biological measures that doesn't necessarily match intellectual or emotional development. Conclusion. Mental age highlights cognitive growth, while chronological age tracks biological time. The two can differ, reflecting that intellectual development varies among individuals.
Hi everyone, welcome to Speaking in Psychology. Today we will gonna talk about Spearman's general intelligence theory. Let's define intelligence at first. Is it being creative, being a successful student, having a good memory? Actually, it can be none or it can be all. It's kind of philosophical question. But let's have a general definition. Intelligence can be the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. There are several theories of intelligence and they define intelligence in different ways. For example, a single entity, or a few multiple entities, or many multiple entities, or a hierarchical entity. And general intelligence theory is one of those who defines it as single entity. Now let's talk about Spearman's general intelligence. It's also known as two-factor theory of intelligence. It is theorized by Charles Spearman, who was a British psychologist, and this theory defines intelligence as one single entity. But why? What's the reason? Spearman made an experiment with several different intellectual tasks in order to measure intelligence, and he saw that results of all tasks are correlated. For example, if a student has a high score in vocabulary test, that student also has a high score in math test. Then he came up with general intelligence theory. According to this theory, intelligence is one general ability and has an effect on all mental abilities. He also said that there are two factors affects mental performance. One is G factor, which is general intelligence and it is constant, and the other one is S factor, which includes specific abilities and shows individual differences. Now let's talk about G factor, which is general intelligence. There is only one G, and it is inborn, not learned. It is constant, and it affects all mental abilities. Characteristics of S factor. There are many specific abilities, and they are learned from social environments. They affect the particular ability, not all abilities, and we can show different performances in different abilities. Imagine a pizza with slices. One slice has more cheese and the other one has more olives. Specific abilities are like pizza slices too. They can be different than each other, but they are a part of a whole, which is general intelligence. Let's visualize this theory. We have specific abilities, verbal, numerical, spatial, and mechanical. And they are all interconnected with general intelligence. They are like a chain. What is intelligence in your opinion, and what do you think about general intelligence theory? I would be very happy to see your ideas in comment section. If you want to get more detailed information, you can take a glance at my references. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe my channel, and follow me in Twitter and also Instagram as Speaking Insight. See you in the next video.
The 4 Spearman's specific factor. Number 1. Numerical. This refers to the ability to perform mathematical operations, solve problems involving numbers, and understand quantitative concepts. It involves skills like arithmetic, number sequencing, and statistical reasoning. Number 2. Verbal. Verbal ability refers to the capacity to understand, interpret, and use language effectively. This includes skills in reading comprehension, vocabulary, and verbal reasoning such as understanding word meanings and language structures. Number 3. Spatial. Spatial ability involves visualizing and manipulating objects in space. These skills help tasks like understanding maps, interpreting diagrams, or mentally rotating objects to see how they fit together. And lastly, we have mechanical. Mechanical ability refers to the understanding of physical principles and operation of mechanical systems. These involve knowledge of tools, machines, and physical concepts like force and motion, as well as problem solving in mechanical contexts. And for conclusion, each of these S factors represent a specific area of intelligence that contributes to overall cognitive abilities according to Spearman's theory. 7 Primary Mental Abilities by Thurston. Here are the 7 primary mental ability. First, we have verbal comprehension. Second, number facility. Number 3, associative memory. And number 4, reasoning ability. Number 5, word fluency. Number 6, spatial ability. And lastly, we have perceptual speed. First, we have verbal comprehension. This refers to the ability to understand, analyze, and interpret written or spoken language. It involves skills like reading comprehension, vocabulary knowledge, and language interpretation. Number 2, number facility, the ability to quickly and accurately perform mathematical calculation. This includes basic arithmetic operation and problem solving involving numbers. Number 3, associative memory, the capacity to remember and recall information, particularly the ability to form and retrieve association between things, such as pairing words or facts. Number 4, reasoning ability, the capacity to think logically, solve problems, and identify patterns or relationships among concepts. It involves both inductive and deductive reasoning. Number 5, word fluency. This is the ability to generate words quickly, particularly under specific constraints, such as finding words that begin with a certain letter or rhyme with another word. Number 6, spatial ability. The skill to visualize and manipulate object or shape mentally. It helps in tasks involving spatial orientation, such as understanding maps or visualizing objects in different orientation. Lastly, we have perceptual speed, the ability to quickly and accurately compare or identify differences and similarities among various stimuli. This involves tasks requiring quick visual or cognitive discrimination.
L.L. Thurston, in full Louis Leon Thurston, was born on May 27, 1887 in Chicago, U.S. He was an American psychologist who was instrumental in the advancement of psychometrics, the science that calculates mental capacities, and who created measurable methods for numerous factor investigation of performance on psychological tests. Thurston was initially intrigued by arithmetic and designing. He considered electrical designing at Cornell University, Ithaca, New York, and worked momentarily as a colleague to Thomas Edison, prior to taking a teaching position at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, 1912. He got keen on the psychology of learning, and accepted his PhD in psychology from the University of Chicago in 1917. One of his very famous theories is the theory of intelligence, or the multiple factor theory. Now suggests that intelligence of a person can be divided among 7 different areas. These 7 areas are known as 7 primary mental abilities. These abilities are completely different, separate, and independent of each other. 1. Verbal comprehension. Verbal comprehension is basically about how much and how easily you can understand and perceive the relevance of the material that you are reading or listening to. For example, while reading a novel, to what extent can you understand what's written in the novel determines your verbal comprehension. It is basically your ability to interpret the information. 2. Verbal fluency. Verbal fluency basically tests your speed and accuracy in coming up with words and sentences. This is basically tested in our everyday lives. Verbal fluency is constantly tested when we have conversations in our routine life. The more fluent and elaborate you are, the better you are at this ability. For example, suppose you are to come up with words from a given alphabet within a minute, the number of words you could come up with determines your verbal fluency. 3. Numerical ability. This ability measures your comfort and accuracy with numbers. There are different branches in numerical ability such as ratios, percentage, addition, subtraction, etc., and your accuracy in all these fields determines your numerical ability. There are some companies that hire people especially for this kind of a job. Basically, How comfortable you are with numbers, that is what that matters in this area. 4. Perceptual speed. This determines how fast you can see, process, and understand the visuals shown to you, and to what depth you can understand them. The area basically tests your speed with visual information. If you process visual information quickly, you are high on perceptual speed. For example, proofreaders look at information and spot errors in no time. This implies that their perceptual speed is polished. 5. Inductive reasoning. This branch of intelligence is meant to judge your logic. Reasoning is your power to build up logical connections and perceive information in a logical manner. Inductive reasoning means if you can reach a general conclusion through some specific details with the help of your reasoning skills. This area determines how logical you are and how capable you are of drawing up conclusions with the help of some specific details. 6. Spatial visualization. This area determines how competent you are in identifying distances and analyzing spaces. The analysis of distances, spaces, dimensions, etc. All of this falls under spatial visualization. For example, an architect studies a place and then decides what he wants to do with it, and comes up with ideas. He does all of this with the help of his spatial visualization skills. It is basically the decisive factor of how much you understand the spaces around you. 7. Memory. This specific ability is used in all the tasks. It determines how much you remember from the information you have consumed earlier. This part of the intelligence is considered to be pretty important since childhood. It is all about how much perceived information you can memorize and keep it stored in your memory. This is all about Thurston's theory of intelligence. This theory is not a contradiction to Spearman's theory. It is just an extension, or maybe a completely different type of analysis. These 7 abilities define a person's intelligence according to Thurston.
Meaning of Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence. In order to capture the full range of abilities and talent that people possess, Gardner theories that people do not have just an intellectual capacity but have many kinds of intelligence.
Ms. Bloomberg is aware of the multiple intelligence theory. Each student comes to class with a different type of intelligence. For instance, a student who is highly developed with music can be asked to learn about space by making up a song about it.
Intelligence, the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. Multiple intelligence was developed in 1983 by Dr. Howard Gardner. It suggests that the traditional notion of intelligence based on IQ testing is far too limited. Instead, Dr. Gardner proposed 9 different intelligence to account for a broader range of human potential in children and adults. Linguistic, capacity to use words effectively both orally and in written form. Logical, mathematical capacity with numbers, logical patterns, and relationships. Spatial, ability to perceive the visual spatial world accurately. Bodily kinesthetic show expertise in using one's body to express ideas and feelings. Musical, discriminate as a music critic. Interpersonal, ability to perceive and make distinction in moods. Intrapersonal, ability to act adaptively on basis on the one's self-knowledge. Naturalist, ability to function well in the natural environment. Who is Robert Sternberg? He is an American psychologist and psychometrician. The three categories are componential, analytical, experimental, creative, and practical, contextual. Sternberg's theory used a cognitive approach, not a behaviorist one. He believed intelligent tests should include more creativity aspects. Not everyone is just book smart. The main idea of Atkinson and Shiffrin, they believe that once information enters the brain, it must be either stored or maintained, and that the information which is stored goes into the three distinct memory systems: the sensory registered, short-term memory, and the long-term memory.
The Atkinson and Shiffrin model, also known as multi-store model, is a model of memory proposed in 1968 by Richard Atkinson and Richard Shiffrin. The model states that human memory has three separate components: sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. The first component is sensory memory. During every moment of life, sensory information is being taken in by sensory receptors and processed by the nervous system. There are three main types of sensory memory: iconic memory that registers through visual stimuli, echoic memory that registers through auditory system, and haptic memory that registers through touch. Sensory information is stored in sensory memory just long enough to be transferred to short-term memory. The second component is a short-term memory. Short-term memory is the capacity for holding a small amount of information in mind in an active, readily available state for the short period of time. When it comes to short-term memory, there are two things to keep in mind, and that is duration and capacity. Information kept in short-term memory will be stored for approximately 20 to 30 seconds before it's either forgotten or stored in a long-term memory. When it comes to short-term memory capacity, the magic number seems to be 7 plus or minus 2, and it is also known as channel capacity. The third component is a long-term memory. Long-term memory refers to the information stored in your brain over an extended period of time. It can store a seemingly unlimited amount of information, almost indefinitely. I hope that you enjoyed this video and I was able to give you a quick overview of what Atkinson and Shiffrin memory model is and how you process your information. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate if you could press the like button, as this will help the video reach more people and spread the message.
What is genetics?
Piaget's theory argues that we have to conquer 4 stages of cognitive development. First, the sensory motor stage. Second, the pre-operational stage. Third, the concrete operational stage. And fourth, the formal operational stage. Only once we have gone through all the stages, at what age can vary, we are able to reach full human intelligence. 1. The sensory motor stage, ages birth to 2. In the sensory motor stage, we develop through experiences and movement our 5 senses. Our brain wants to see, hear, smell, taste and touch as much as possible. First, we start with simple reflexes, and soon after we develop our first habits. From 4 months old, we become aware of things beyond our own body, and then as we get older, we learn to do things intentionally. A key milestone is the development of working memory, or in Piaget terms, our realization of object permanence. Before that, our mum can show and then hide a teddy, and we would think it's gone. After, we understand that objects continue to exist even when we can't see them. We start becoming curious about everything. We want to smell flowers, taste food, listen to sounds, and talk to strangers. To explore more, we move. We learn to sit, crawl, stand, walk, and even to run. This increased physical mobility consequently leads to increased cognitive development. But we remain egocentric, meaning we can perceive the world only from our own point of view. 2. The pre-operational stage, ages 2 to 7. Our thinking is mainly categorized through symbolic functions and intuitive thoughts. We have lots of fantasies and believe objects are alive. As we are not able to apply specific cognitive operations, Piaget calls this stage pre-operational. We learn to speak and understand that words, images, and gestures are symbols for something else. When we draw our family, we are not concerned about drawing each person to scale, but rather with their symbolic meanings. We love to play pretend, which allows us to experience something new and learn a lot. At around age 4, most of us become very curious and ask many questions. We want to know everything. We can call it the birth of primitive reasoning. Piaget calls it the intuitive age, because while we realize that we have a vast amount of knowledge, we have no idea how we acquired it. Our thinking in this stage is still pretty egocentric. We think others see the world like we do, and still don't understand that they see it differently. 3. The concrete operational stage, ages 7 to 11. We finally discover logic, and we develop concrete cognitive operations, such as sorting objects in a certain order. One example of this is inductive reasoning, which means that if we see someone eating a cookie, we can draw a conclusion and then make a generalization. And we now get the concept of conservation. We understand that if we pour orange juice from a normal glass to a taller one, the amount stays the same. Our younger sister will pick the taller glass, thinking she gets more. By the same logic, we only now can understand that if 3 plus 5 equals 8, then 8 minus 3 must equal 5. Our brain learns to rearrange our thoughts, to classify and build concrete operational mental structures. For example, we now know that we can reverse an action by doing the opposite. Excited by our new mental abilities, we apply them in conversations, activities, when we learn to write, and in school. As a result, we get to know ourselves better. We begin to understand that our thoughts and feelings are unique and not necessarily those of others. That means that we learn to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. 4. The formal operational stage, age 12 plus. Once we become teenagers, we become formally operational. We now have the ability to think more rationally about abstract concepts and hypothetical events. Our advanced cognitive abilities allow us to understand abstract concepts such as success and failure, love and hate. We form a deeper understanding of our own identity and our morality. We now also think that we understand why people behave the way they behave, and as a result, can become more compassionate. Our brain can now do deductive reasoning, which means we can compare two statements and reach a logical generalization. Our new mental skills allow us to plan our life systematically and prioritize, and we can make assumptions about events that have no necessary relation to reality. We can now also philosophize and just think about thinking itself. Our new sense for our identity now also creates egocentric thoughts, and some start to see an imaginary audience watching them all the time. Piaget believed in lifelong learning, but insisted that the formal operational stage is the final stage of our cognitive development. Jean Piaget's first interests were animals, and he published his first scientific paper on albino sparrows in 1907 when he was just 11 years old. In 1920, he began working with standardized intelligence tests. He realized that younger children consistently make types of mistakes that older children do not. He concluded that they must think differently and spent the rest of his life studying the intellectual development of children.
What is environment?
Vygotsky's theory of social development argues that community and language play a central part in learning. While Jean Piaget concluded that children's cognitive development happens in stages, Vygotsky rejected his ideas and believed that children develop independently of specific stages as the result of social interactions. Vygotsky claimed that we are born with 4 elementary mental functions: attention, sensation, perception, and memory. It is our social and cultural environment that allows us to use these elementary skills to develop and finally gain higher mental functions. This development ideally happens in the zone of proximal development. First, there is what we can do on our own. Then, there is the zone of proximal development, which represents what we can do with the help of an adult, a friend, technology, or what Vygotsky called the more knowledgeable other. Last, there is what's beyond our reach. To illustrate this, let us think of twins who were raised in a community in which boys are expected to learn and succeed, while girls are only expected to be pretty. At the age of 10 months, both have the ability to crawl and are in the zone of proximal development for learning how to stand on their feet. The more knowledgeable other, in this case the father, provides the boy with opportunities to practice in a playroom that he has equipped with scaffolding and other objects. The boy is encouraged to explore the equipment, and eventually he uses it to pull himself up. A few hours later, he's cruising along the structures, and a few days later, he's standing on his feet. The girl also has the potential to stand, but does not receive any support in learning the skill. When we compare the two, we see that while the girl is still trying to get up, the boy has moved into a new zone. He knows how to balance while standing, and now has the potential to learn how to walk. Both will eventually learn how to walk, but according to Vygotsky, the boy will be more skilled. The same principles apply to all learning and the development of higher cognitive functions, and only those learning with the assistance of a capable mentor can reach the full potential of their ability. Vygotsky therefore believed that inside the zone of proximal development, learning can precede development, which means that a child is able to learn skills that go beyond their natural maturity. He also established an explicit connection between speech and mental concepts, arguing that inner speech develops from external speech via a gradual process of internalization. This means that thought itself develops as a result of conversation. Therefore, younger children who don't finish this process can only think out loud. Once the process is complete, inner speech and spoken language become independent. Lev Vygotsky died of tuberculosis in 1934 at the age of 37. Despite his young age, he became one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. He left the following advice for educators. By giving students practice in talking with others, we give them frames for thinking on their own. What do you think? Can a child learn anything regardless of any developmental prerequisites? And do we learn only through social and cultural contexts? And if so, do you think it is appropriate for a more knowledgeable other to determine what a child should learn next? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
education is important? Education is vital for several reasons. Personal development. Education enhances an individual's knowledge, skills, and abilities, contributing to personal growth and self-improvement. Economic growth. An educated workforce is essential for the economic development of a country. It leads to better job opportunities, higher incomes, and improved standards of living. Social stability. Education promotes social cohesion and stability by teaching values such as tolerance, respect, and civic responsibility. It helps reduce crime and fosters community engagement. Health benefits. Educated individuals are more likely to make informed health choices, leading to healthier lifestyles and longer life expectancies. They are also better equipped to understand and utilize healthcare services. Empowerment. Education empowers individuals by providing them with the knowledge and skills needed to make informed decisions and participate fully in society. It is particularly crucial for the empowerment of marginalized groups, including women and minorities. Innovation and progress. Education drives innovation and technological advancement. It equips individuals with critical thinking and problem-solving skills, which are essential for addressing global challenges and advancing society. Global perspective. Education broadens perspectives, fosters understanding of different cultures, and promotes global awareness. This helps create a more interconnected and peaceful world. Overall, education is a fundamental human right that has profound impacts on individuals, communities, and nations. It is a key driver of sustainable development and essential for achieving equitable and inclusive societies.
Good day everyone! For today's video, we are going to tackle the language development part of our last lesson. But before that, let me introduce myself. My name is Edgar R. Herrera, and I am a student in BSED Mathematics 1A. Alright, first, I am going to show you this image. So, do you have any idea? So, this image is a chart concerning speech, language, and communication development. Now, let's proceed to our main discussion. So, I will define the main idea of the different language development theories. So, this includes the Neil Everett's theory, language crutches, the communicative itch, Chomsky nativist linguistic theory, universal grammar, and Burhus Frederick Skinner behaviorist theory. So there's no right place to start when discussing the theories of language development. So many schools of thought have developed and influenced the history of language acquisition as an academic discipline. So now let's get into 3 theories and approaches that give us insights into language phenomenon.
In the late 1970s, the anthropologist Daniel Everett was dispatched to an Amazonian tribe with about 350 members, intending to learn their language and convert them to Christianity. But what he realised about this language was something quite unique. It had no words for numbers. This tribe, because of their language, had no way of counting. The BRIONES are the only remaining tribe of the Mura people, and have had contact with others in Brazil for about 200 years, but they're still a mostly monolingual community. Their language is the only one left of its family, and it's known for its strange features. It can be whistled, cried, or used in muffled eating speech because of its tonality. It has no abstract colour words. It has an inventory including some pretty wild phones, but perhaps strangest of all is its lack of numbers. In 1980, scared that they were being cheated when trading with outsiders, the BRIONES insisted that Everett and his wife teach them how to count. But while that's going on, let me tell you about today's sponsor. Unlike with those Brazilian traders, you can rest assured that you're getting a good deal when you sign up to HelloFresh. HelloFresh is the biggest meal kit provider in the United States, who send you fresh produce that travels straight from the farm to your door in under a week. And you don't even need to be able to count, because all the portions are measured out and ready for you, making everything easier and less stressful. There are plenty of vegetarian, pescatarian, and fit and wholesome options, and with Hello Custom, you can even customize your meals. It's never been easier to eat your own way. And I know what you're thinking. Ordering all this food from HelloFresh, that must be really bad for the environment, right? Well, HelloFresh is actually the first carbon-neutral meal kit company, and nearly all its packaging is recyclable. In fact, according to a University of Michigan study, HelloFresh's streamlined supply chain actually reduces greenhouse gas emissions compared to regular grocery shopping. So use my link or go to hellofresh.com and use the code POGKLEINDECK70 for 70% off plus free shipping on your first box. Thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video. Alright, now let's check in on the BRIONES 8 months later. So every evening in that time, Everett's entire family have been teaching the men and women of the tribe to count in Portuguese. And well, they've given up. Despite showing enthusiasm and enjoyment of the lessons, the BRIONES ultimately decided that the material was impossible for them to learn, as still, not a single one could count to 10 or even add 1 plus 1. So it does seem kind of like, because the BRIONES don't have numbers in their language, this fundamentally changes their ability to grasp the concept of numbers at all. And yes, this is sounding a lot like a theory which predates Everett's work by nearly 40 years. Let's talk about that guy, Whorf. In 1936, Benjamin Lee Whorf wrote his famous paper, An American Indian Model of the Universe, in which he discusses the relationship of the Hopi tribe to time. In popular culture, his idea has often been simplified to the catchphrase, the Hopi have no concept of time, although he never really claims this in the paper. It's kind of difficult to pick out what he does claim, actually. Whorf is kind of a bad writer, but he does clearly believe that the Hopi experience time in a fundamentally different way to the speaker of the standard average European language, and he claims that the Hopi language contains no reference to time, either explicit or implicit. This was the basis of his theory of linguistic relativity, where from an individual's perspective, the world is different based on the language they are experiencing it in. Now, of course, the big problem with this theory is that it's just not true, is it? Enter 𝐃𝐈𝐒𝐂𝐂𝐂𝐑, whose 600-page book, Hopi Time, lays out the Hopi concept of time, from their calendar systems to the grammatical constructions they use to express temporal relations in their language. But just while 𝐃𝐈𝐒𝐂𝐂𝐂𝐑 was laying the myth of the timeless Hopi to rest, Everett was finding what could be seen as new evidence for linguistic relativity among the BRIONES. But Everett's claims are not quite the same as Whorf's. The theory of linguistic relativity claims that a person's understanding of the world changes based on the language they speak, but the case of the BRIONES' inability to count is one of expressive capabilities. As Everett writes, he is not making a claim about BRIONES' conceptual abilities, but about their expression of certain concepts linguistically, and this is a crucial difference. And lab experiments suggest that the Piraña do have a concept of amount, being able to match exact quantities laid before them, but lack the system of abstractions necessary to gain counting or numeracy skills. So does language change the way you think? Yes, in some ways it does. The way you experience the world? Not as far as Everett and the Piraña are concerned, anyway. This hasn't stopped Everett from being pretty heavily criticised though, because at a glance, it feels a little bit like Worf, doesn't it? An outside academic coming in and studying an indigenous culture, writing about how different they are from us, in papers steeped in mystification and racist vibes? Worf has racist vibes, I don't know how else to put it. Everett isn't as extreme, is a much better writer, is more careful with his words, but ultimately, is he just coming to a Eurocentric misunderstanding of how the Piraña express quantities? Well, maybe? But just shouting Eurocentric at something isn't actually an argument. Sure, it's a bias to be aware of, but it does nothing to prove Everett and Frank's studies and lab experiments wrong. The real problem here is that Everett is the guy who knows anything about the Piraña. We need a greater range of opinions, more experts, more studies, more experiments, and Everett himself wants academics to go to the Amazon basin and test his theories. So, is it possible that in 40 years' time, Everett will get his own Malotki, who comes along with his 600-page book about how his life's work was a waste of time? Yes, it's possible. But I still think it's pretty lazy and anti-intellectual to respond to Everett as, say, Steven Pinker did, by framing his observations as an anti-Chomsky discovery rather than as an un-PC Eurocentric condescension. Everett was able to get away with claims that would have aroused the fury of anthropologists in any other context. This doesn't respond to any of Everett's work, it just kind of dances around the issue. Like, this would be an explanation as to why Everett would hypothetically be wrong, but it doesn't show in any capacity that he is.
Language sets us apart. Other animals communicate, but they don't have anything approaching the sophisticated grammar of human languages. How is it that we learn to speak and think in language so easily? Young children become adept in a new language very quickly. Since the dawn of philosophy, thinkers have argued about whether or not we have innate ideas, whether we are born knowing things as Plato believed, or rather as John Locke and other empiricists argued, the mind is a blank slate on which experience writes. An American linguist, Noam Chomsky, gave a twist to this debate in the 1960s by demonstrating that children learning to speak just don't have enough information to form the complex grammatical maneuvers that allow them to generate unlimited new and original sentences. Yet they do so with ease. There's a poverty of stimulus. Something else must be going on. Chomsky's hypothesis was that there are inborn structures in our brain, what he called a language acquisition device, or LAD, which gives us a natural propensity to organize the spoken language that we hear in various grammatical ways. Without that, we couldn't get started as language learners. If he's right, language structure is hardwired as a kind of universal grammar. Our slates have been written on before we emerged from the womb.
Operant conditioning is based on the idea that we can increase or decrease a certain behavior by adding a consequence. For example, if a dog poops on a carpet, we can either provide reinforcement so the dog does it again, or punishment so the dog stops. Both reinforcement and punishment can either be positive or negative, which means we have 4 possible ways to teach this dog a lesson. We can draw the 4 options in a table. If reinforcement is positive, we add something pleasant, like a cookie, to increase the likelihood of a behavior. If reinforcement is negative, we still want to increase the desired behavior, this time by removing something unpleasant, like the leash. If punishment is positive, we add an unpleasant response to decrease behavior. When punishment is negative, we also want to decrease behavior, now by removing something pleasant, like the comfy carpet. If we stop any sort of manipulation, the conditioned behavior will eventually disappear again. This is called extinction. Operant conditioning was first studied by Edward L. Thorndike, and later made famous by the work of B.F. Skinner. Skinner believed that organisms are doing what they do naturally until they accidentally encounter a stimulus that creates conditioning, which results in a change in behavior. To test this, he placed a rat inside an operant conditioning chamber, which later became known as the Skinner box. Among other things, inside the box was a lever that would release food when pressed. Conditioning happens in a three-term contingency, today known as the ABCs of behavior. A stands for antecedent. The rat accidentally hits the lever that triggers the release of food. B stands for behavior and refers to the response. The rat keeps pressing the lever. C stands for consequence. Food keeps coming out. The strength of the response to the conditioning depends on the schedule of reinforcement. If there is always food after pressing, the rat behaves predictably. If the food is released randomly, the rat behaves erratically like an addict. Skinner, born in 1904, was a professor of psychology and subscribed to behaviorism. He argued that you can only study behavior that is visible, and anything happening only within the mind is either a misconception or irrelevant to science. He thought free will was an illusion because behavior is either random or a reaction to the environment. His work became the foundation for behavioral therapy, military drills, and animal training. You can try this classroom exercise on positive reinforcement. One individual must exit the room. Now decide on a task which that individual will complete, such as finding a particular book. Then choose a non-verbal way of reinforcing that task, such as clapping your hands. Invite the person to come back into the room and let them try and complete the task, but don't give any instructions. Every time they are on the right track in regards to completing the task, clap your hands louder. If they move away from performing the task, reduce your applause or stop it entirely. Once the person understands what they are supposed to do, let them explain the task. Did they get it right?
Vygotsky's theory of social development argues that community and language play a central part in learning, while Jean Piaget concluded that children's cognitive development happens in stages. Vygotsky rejected his ideas and believed that children develop independently of specific stages as the result of social interactions. Vygotsky claimed that we are born with 4 elementary mental functions: attention, sensation, perception, and memory. It is our social and cultural environment that allows us to use these elementary skills to develop and finally gain higher mental functions. This development ideally happens in the zone of proximal development. First, there is what we can do on our own. Then, there is the zone of proximal development, which represents what we can do with the help of an adult, a friend, technology, or what Vygotsky called the more knowledgeable other. Last, there is what's beyond our reach. Piaget's theory argues that we have to conquer 4 stages of cognitive development. First, the sensory motor stage. Second, the pre-operational stage. Third, the concrete operational stage. And fourth, the formal operational stage. Only once we have gone through all the stages, at what age can vary, we are able to reach full human intelligence. 1. The sensory motor stage, ages birth to 2. In the sensory motor stage, we develop through experiences and movement our 5 senses. Our brain wants to see, hear, smell, taste and touch as much as possible. First, we start with simple reflexes, and soon after we develop our first habits. From 4 months old, we become aware of things beyond our own body, and then as we get older, we learn to do things intentionally. A key milestone is the development of working memory, or in Piaget terms, our realization of object permanence. Before that, our mum can show and then hide a teddy and we would think it's gone. After, we understand that objects continue to exist even when we can't see them. We start becoming curious about everything. We want to smell flowers, taste food, listen to sounds, and talk to strangers. To explore more, we move. We learn to sit, crawl, stand, walk, and even to run. This increased physical mobility consequently leads to increased cognitive development. But we remain egocentric, meaning we can perceive the world only from our own point of view. 2. The pre-operational stage, ages 2 to 7. Our thinking is mainly categorized through symbolic functions and intuitive thoughts. We have lots of fantasies and believe objects are alive. As we are not able to apply specific cognitive operations, Piaget calls this stage pre-operational. We learn to speak and understand that words, images, and gestures are symbols for something else. When we draw our family, we are not concerned about drawing each person to scale, but rather with their symbolic meanings. We love to play pretend, which allows us to experience something new and learn a lot. At around age 4, most of us become very curious and ask many questions. We want to know everything. We can call it the birth of primitive reasoning. Piaget calls it the intuitive age, because while we realize that we have a vast amount of knowledge, we have no idea how we acquired it. Our thinking in this stage is still pretty egocentric. We think others see the world like we do, and still don't understand that they see it differently. 3. The concrete operational stage, ages 7 to 11. We finally discover logic and we develop concrete cognitive operations, such as sorting objects in a certain order. One example of this is inductive reasoning, which means that if we see someone eating a cookie, we can draw a conclusion and then make a generalization. And we now get the concept of conservation. We understand that if we pour orange juice from a normal glass to a taller one, the amount stays the same. Our younger sister will pick the taller glass, thinking she gets more. By the same logic, we only now can understand that if 3 plus 5 equals 8, then 8 minus 3 must equal 5. 4. The formal operational stage, age 12 plus. Once we become teenagers, we become formally operational. We now have the ability to think more rationally about abstract concepts and hypothetical events. Our advanced cognitive abilities allow us to understand abstract concepts such as success and failure, love and hate. We form a deeper understanding of our own identity and our morality. We now also think that we understand why people behave the way they behave, and as a result, can become more compassionate. Our brain can now do deductive reasoning, which means we can compare two statements and reach a logical generalization. Our new mental skills allow us to plan our life systematically and prioritize, and we can make assumptions about events that have no necessary relation to reality. We can now also philosophize and just think about thinking itself. Our new sense for our identity now also creates egocentric thoughts, and some start to see an imaginary audience watching them all the time. Piaget believed in lifelong learning, but insisted that the formal operational stage is the final stage of our cognitive development.